The forest path had been there for as long as Claire Hartwell could remember, longer than her 8 years in these mountains, longer than the cabin she'd built with her own hands after Daniel died, longer, probably, than the pines that flanked it on both sides, their trunks wide as wagon wheels, their branches filtering the October light into something soft and golden. She'd walked that path 100 times, maybe more. It cut through the eastern ridge, past the old beaver dam, and opened into a high meadow where wild strawberries grew in June, and elk gathered in September. It was the quickest route to the spring where she filled her water jugs, the clearest water for 20 miles in any direction. But for 5 days now, Jasper wouldn't go near it. The donkey stood at the trailhead this morning like he had every morning since Monday, ears pinned flat against his skull, nostrils flaring with each breath. Claire sat on his back, reins loose in her callous hands, and felt his body trembling beneath her thighs. "Come on, boy," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The kind of voice she'd learned to use in the mountains, where loud sounds felt like violations. "It's just trees. Same trees as yesterday." Jasper didn't move. His hooves were planted in the dirt like he'd grown roots. When Claire touched her heels to his sides, gentle pressure, just a suggestion, he threw his head up so hard she nearly lost her seat. Then he backed up 3 steps, turned his body sideways to the trail, and refused to even look at it. Claire dismounted, her boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. The morning air was cold enough that her breath formed small clouds, but she could feel sweat dampening her shirt beneath her canvas jacket. Not from exertion, from the wrongness of it all. Animals knew things. She'd learned that in her years alone. They sensed weather changes before instruments could measure them. They felt earthquakes minutes before the ground shook. They understood danger in ways human logic couldn't touch. And Jasper's terrified. She led him by the halter, trying to coax him forward on foot. "Just a few steps," she said. "Just to the bend where the aspens start. Remember the aspens? You like those?" The donkey dug in, pulling back against the rope with surprising strength for an animal that usually followed her anywhere. His eyes showed white at the edges. A low, anxious bray rattled out his chest. Claire stopped pulling. She stood at the mouth of the trail, studying it in the morning light. Nothing looked different. The same carpet of pine needles and scattered stones. The same cathedral quiet that all old forests held. The same scent of resin and damp earth. But something felt wrong. Had felt wrong since Monday. She couldn't name it, couldn't point to a single thing that had changed. Yet the air at the trailhead seemed heavier somehow. Thicker, like the forest was holding its breath. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Claire had come to these mountains 8 years ago with nothing but grief and a desperate need for silence. Daniel had been gone for 3 months when she'd finally admitted she couldn't stay in their house anymore, couldn't sleep in their bed, couldn't walk past his workshop without her chest constricting so tight she thought her ribs would crack. Pancreatic cancer had taken him in 6 weeks. 6 weeks from diagnosis to death, from "we caught it early" to "there's nothing more we can do." He'd been 42. She'd been 35. They'd been married for 12 years and had been trying for a baby for 3. After the funeral, after the well-meaning visitors stopped coming, after the casseroles in her freezer grew freezer-burned and forgotten, Claire had sold everything. The house, the car, the furniture, all of it. She'd bought Jasper from a rancher in Wyoming, loaded camping gear and basic tools into 2 panniers, and ridden north until the roads ran out. She'd found this place in late November, a small clearing at 7,200 feet, where someone had once tried a homestead and failed. The cabin foundation was still there, just stones and rotted timbers. But the spring ran year-round, and the southern exposure meant good sun in winter. The forest was thick enough to break the wind, but open enough to not feel claustrophobic. She'd spent that first winter in a tent, working to the coldest months to build something permanent. She'd felled trees, stripped bark, notched logs. She'd mixed mortar from clay and sand, chinked gaps with moss and mud. She'd built a root cellar by hand, digging into the hillside until her shoulders screamed and her palms bled through her gloves. The work had saved her, or at least kept her alive, which amounted to the same thing. By spring, she had walls and a roof. By summer, a functional stove and windows, she'd packed it on Jasper's back from a salvage yard 3 days' ride away. By the following winter, she had a home. It wasn't much. 1 room, maybe 16 by 20 feet, with a sleeping loft she could only stand up in at the peak. A table she'd built from split pine. 2 chairs, though she only ever used one. Shelves for her books, hooks for her clothes, a few pots and pans hanging from the rafters. But it was hers. And more importantly, it was quiet. No neighbors asking how she was doing. No therapist suggesting she worked through her stages of grief. No family members hinting that maybe it was time to move on, to start dating again, to think about the future. Just mountains and sky and the endless, holy silence of a world that didn't care about human suffering, because it had never promised human happiness in the first place. Claire had made peace with that silence, had learned to live inside it without going mad. She talked to Jasper sometimes, narrating her days in a low murmur. She sang while she worked, old folk songs her grandmother had taught her, but mostly she moved through her routines in wordless concentration, chopping wood, hauling water, tending the small garden she'd carved into the hillside. The work was hard, but she'd grown strong. Her arms were lean and corded with muscle. Her hands were rough, scarred from tools and thorns and cold. Her face was weathered, lines etched around her eyes from squinting into distance and wind. Her hair, once carefully styled and highlighted, now hung in a thick braid down her back, more silver than brown. She was 43 years old and looked older, but she was alive. She was surviving. And some days when the light hit the aspens just right, or when she caught the sharp, clean scent of pine after rain, she even felt something close to contentment. Until Monday, when Jasper had first refused the trail. Section 2. The catalyst, inciting incident. Claire stood at the trailhead for a long time that 5th morning, listening to the forest. Birds called from the canopy, chickadees and nuthatches going about their business. A squirrel chattered somewhere to her left, scolding an intruder she couldn't see. Wind moved through the high branches with a sound like distant water. Normal sounds. Nothing wrong, but Jasper wouldn't budge. She tried everything she could think of. She offered him the dried apple slices she usually saved for rewards. He turned his head away. She tried leading him in a wide circle, approaching the trail from different angles. He balked every time, sometimes throwing his head up so violently the halter rope burned across her palm. Once, she tried simply walking down the trail herself, hoping he'd follow out of loyalty or loneliness. She made it maybe 20 yards before looking back and seeing him still planted at the trailhead, watching her with what looked like betrayal in his dark eyes. She'd come back then, spooked by her own isolation, by the realization that if something happened to her on that trail, Jasper wouldn't come to help, wouldn't even come to investigate. Whatever was wrong with the path, his instincts told him to stay away, and animal instincts, Claire had learned, were usually right. She'd been rationing water since Wednesday. The spring behind her cabin had dried up sometime in late September, as it did most years when the snowpack ran low. Her usual solution was to haul water from the eastern spring, the one at the end of the forest trail. She had 2 5-gallon jugs that she could balance across Jasper's back, enough for 3 or 4 days if she was careful. But she hadn't been able to reach the spring since Sunday, and her reserve was down to maybe half a gallon. She'd tried finding alternate sources. There was a creek about 2 miles south, but it ran through marshy ground that made the water suspect. She'd boiled a jugful on Tuesday, but it had tasted of sulfur and iron. She'd used it for washing, not drinking. The nearest reliable water after the eastern spring was the reservoir at Hackberry Basin, a full day's ride to the north. She could make the trip, but would burn through her energy reserves in Jasper's. And with winter coming on, with the first real snow probably less than 2 weeks away, she needed to conserve both. The forest trail was the only practical option, which meant she needed to figure out what had Jasper so spooked, or she needed to force him past it. Claire looked at her donkey, at the way his ears stayed pinned, at the tension in his neck and shoulders. She thought about Daniel, about the way he'd sometimes wake her in the night, hand on her shoulder, voice urgent. "Something's wrong with the furnace," he'd say. Or, "I think I heard glass break downstairs." His instincts had always been good. She'd learned to trust them. And Jasper's instincts were all he had. She made her decision. "All right," she said softly, running her hand down the donkey's neck. "All right, we'll try something different." She led him back to the cabin, unsaddled him, and turned him loose in the small paddock she fenced. Then she gathered what she'd need for a solo investigation. Her hunting knife sheathed on her belt, a coil of rope, the small hatchet she used for a clearing trail, her canteen, still holding maybe a cup of water, and Daniel's old compass, the brass one he'd carried hiking, the one she couldn't quite bring herself to leave behind when she'd sold everything else. She'd walk the trail herself. She'd figure out what had changed, what had triggered Jasper's fear. And if she found nothing, if it was all just animal nervousness without cause, she'd come back and make him walk it whether he wanted to or not, because she couldn't survive up here without water. And pride, she'd learned, was a luxury the mountains didn't allow. Claire set out just after noon, when the sun was high enough to reach down to the canopy. The temperature had climbed into the low 50s, warm for October at this elevation. She'd left her heavy jacket behind, wearing just her canvas work coat and the wool shirt beneath it. The trail started out familiar. The same rock she'd stepped over 100 times. The same fallen log she used as a landmark, its bark long gone, its was silvered by weather. The same bend where the aspens took over from the pines, their white bark marked with black scars where elk had rubbed their antlers. She walked slowly, paying attention, looking for signs of disturbance. Fresh digging from bears, claw marks on trees from mountain lions, scat that might indicate wolves, though she hadn't seen wolves in this area for years. Nothing. The trail was empty, undisturbed, perfectly normal. But the feeling grew stronger with each step, that sense of wrongness, of weight in the air. Claire stopped at the beaver dam, studying the engineering of it, the way branches and mud had been woven together to create a barrier that turned the creek into a wide, still pond. The beavers had abandoned this dam years ago, moved on to better territory, but the structure remained, slowly decaying but still functional. She knelt at the pond's edge, looking at her reflection in the dark water. The woman looking back was barely recognizable as the person she'd been 8 years ago. Harder, leaner, a stranger wearing her face. The water was perfectly still. No breeze reached down here to ripple it. And in that stillness, Claire saw something that made her breath catch. A shape just beneath the surface. Too regular to be a log. Too large to be a fish. She leaned closer, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The water was murky, stained brown by tannins from decomposing leaves. But there was definitely something there, maybe 3 feet below the surface, pressed against the bottom. Claire looked around for a long stick, found one propped against a nearby pine, probably left by some hiker years ago. She used it to probe the water, feeling for the shape she'd seen. The stick connected with something solid. Not rock, not wood. Something that shifted slightly when she pushed it. Metal. Claire's heart rate picked up. She pulled off her boots and socks, rolled up her pants to her knees. The water would be cold, probably 40 degrees. But she needed to know what was down there. She waded in slowly, feeling the pond bottom turn from solid earth to silky mud. The cold bit into her feet, then her calves, sharp enough to make her gasp. By the time she reached the submerged shape, the water was up to her mid-thigh, and she'd lost most feeling in her lower legs. She reached down, fingers searching through the murk. Her hand closed on something smooth and curved. Metal, definitely metal. Cold, even through the cold water. She tried to lift it, but it was heavier than she'd expected, anchored by mud and time. She had to crouch down, water soaking her shirt, and use both hands to wrestle it free. When she finally pulled it up and carried it to shore, she stood staring at what she'd found, water dripping from her clothes, her mind struggling to process it. A box, military style, made of steel about the size of a large toolbox. The kind designed to be waterproof, to protect equipment or documents. It was locked, or had been once. The lock mechanism was rusted through. Broken, Claire pried at the lid with her hatchet, and after a few minutes of effort, it popped open. Inside, wrapped in thick plastic bags that kept them dry, were papers, documents, photographs, and a surveyor's notebook with a worn leather cover. Claire lifted out the notebook with shaking hands. Opened it to the first page. Property Survey, Hartwell Ridge, commissioned by Elkridge Mining Company, June 1974. Her breath caught. Hartwell Ridge. That was a name on the old maps. The name this area had carried before it was designated as wilderness. Her last name, though she'd always assumed it was coincidence. 100 Hartwells scattered across the country. No reason to think any connection. But as she flipped through the notebook, as she saw the detailed maps and mineral assessments, she felt something cold settle in her stomach. This land had been surveyed for copper and silver. The deposits had been substantial, worth millions even in 1974 dollars. The company had been preparing to file mining claims, to begin extraction operations. But then, according to the notes, something had happened. The survey team had been ordered to stop work. The documents had been classified, and the entire area had been suddenly, mysteriously designated as protected wilderness, which meant no mining, no development, no extraction. The land had been locked away, and apparently, so had the evidence of what lay beneath it. Claire sat on the bank of the beaver pond, her clothes soaked, her body shaking from cold and adrenaline, reading through page after page of technical assessments and corporate memos. And slowly, she began to understand why Jasper had refused to enter the forest. Not because of what was there now, because of what had been buried here, and what someone, somewhere, might be willing to do to keep buried. Section 3. The first reveal mystery deepens. Claire carried the metal box back to her cabin as the afternoon light slanted golden through the trees. Her clothes were still damp, clinging uncomfortably to her skin, but she barely noticed. Her mind was racing through the implications of what she'd found. She'd chosen this land randomly, or at least she'd thought it was random. She'd ridden north until she'd found a place that felt right, where the forest opened into a clearing and the spring ran clear. The Hartwell name on the old maps had seemed like a pleasant coincidence, maybe even a sign. Daniel used to say she was meant for these mountains, that some people were just born belonging to wild places. But what if it wasn't coincidence at all? Back at the cabin, Claire changed into dry clothes and built up the fire in her stove. Then she spread the documents across her table, organizing them by date and type. She worked methodically, the way Daniel had taught her to approach any complex problem, one piece at a time. Build the picture slowly. The earliest document was dated March 1974. A letter from Elkridge Mining Company to the U.S. Forest Service, requesting permission to conduct a mineral survey on federal land in what was then called a Hartwell Ridge area. Permission had been granted. The survey had begun in June. The notebook contained detailed maps showing elevation, water sources, and most importantly, mineral deposits. Copper, silver, and something else. Something the surveyor had marked with special notation. Rare earth elements. Concentration unprecedented. Commercial value extraordinary. Claire knew enough about mining to understand what that meant. Rare earth elements were used in everything from cell phones to military equipment. They were valuable, incredibly valuable, and most of the world's supply came from China, which meant any domestic source was strategically important. A domestic deposit of the size described in these surveys would be worth not millions, but billions. The later documents told a stranger story. In September 1974, the survey team had been abruptly ordered to cease operations. No explanation given, just a terse memo from someone high up in the corporate hierarchy. Suspend all work, remove all personnel and equipment, file all documentation as classified. 2 weeks after that, the wilderness designation had come through. 60,000 acres, including all of Hartwell Ridge, permanently protected from commercial development. And a month after that, according to a newspaper clipping tucked into the box, 3 geologists from Elkridge Mining Company had died in a small plane crash in Montana. The plane had been en route to Washington, D.C. The bodies had been recovered. The cause of the crash was listed as mechanical failure. Claire read the names of the dead men: Thomas Garrett, Richard June, James Hartwell. James Hartwell. She read the name 3 times, her heart pounding harder with each pass. James Hartwell, age 38, survived by his wife, Margaret, and his daughter, Elizabeth. Claire stood up so fast her chair tipped over backward. She paced to the window, stared out at the darkening forest, tried to breathe through the tightness in her chest. James Hartwell had been a geologist. He'd been surveying this land, and then he died in a plane crash on his way to report his findings. Claire's father had been named James Hartwell. He died when she was 2 years old, too young to remember him. Her mother had remarried when Claire was 5, and Claire had taken her stepfather's name, Bishop, Claire Bishop. Later Claire Bishop Hartwell, when she married Daniel. Then Claire Hartwell after he died, and she reclaimed a name that had always felt more truly hers. Her mother had never talked much about Claire's biological father, just that he'd been a geologist, that he'd traveled a lot for work, that he died in an accident when Claire was too young to remember. A plane crash. Her mother had said once, when Claire was old enough to ask questions. In Montana. Very sudden. Very tragic. Claire pressed her forehead against the cold window glass. The dates lined up. The profession lined up. Even the name lined up, though Hartwell wasn't exactly uncommon. But the coincidences were adding up to something that felt less like chance and more like inheritance. What if this wasn't random? What if some buried instinct had drawn her to this specific place, to land her father had surveyed before he died? What if she'd been following invisible threads her whole life? Threads that led back to secrets buried in mountain soil. Claire turned back to the documents. There had to be more. Some proof, some connection. She found it in a folder marked personal effects. Inside were photographs. Survey team members standing in front of equipment. Men in work clothes and hard hats, smiling at the camera. Young and alive and unaware of what was coming. One photograph showed a man crouched near a creek, examining something in a pan. He was lean, dark-haired, maybe in his mid-30s. His face was turned partially away from the camera, but Claire could see his profile. The strong nose, the serious expression, the way he held himself, careful and focused. On the back of the photograph, in faded ink, Jim checking court samples, August 74. Claire studied the photograph for a long time, trying to see herself in that stranger's face, trying to feel some recognition, some inherited memory. She felt nothing. He was just a man in an old photograph, a man who died doing his job, who'd left behind a wife and daughter, who'd had to figure out how to live without him, just like she'd had to figure out how to live without Daniel. The parallel made her chest ache. But if this man really was her father, if he died because of what he'd found on this land, then someone had killed him. The plane crash hadn't been an accident. It had been murder, disguised as mechanical failure. And if people had been willing to kill 3 geologists to keep this secret in 1974, what would they do if they knew someone had found the evidence now? Claire looked toward the window, toward the darkening forest beyond. Jasper was in his paddock, probably bedded down for the night. The cabin was warm, secure, isolated. But suddenly, isolation felt less like safety and more like vulnerability. She'd walked that trail today. She'd found the box. And somewhere, somehow, someone might already know. Claire gathered the documents carefully, returned them to the waterproof bags, and closed the metal box. She needed to hide it somewhere safer than her cabin, somewhere no one would think to look if they came searching. But first, she needed to understand what Jasper had been sensing, because if a donkey could smell danger from 100 yards away, maybe the threat wasn't in the documents themselves. Maybe it was already here, in the forest, watching and waiting. Claire loaded her rifle, checking that it was clean and functional. She hadn't fired it in months, not since she'd scared off a black bear that had gotten too interested in her food stores. But the weight of it in her hands was reassuring. She pulled on her warmest jacket, lit her battery-powered lantern, and stepped out into the October night. The forest was alive with sound. Wind through branches, the distant call of an owl, small creatures moving through underbrush. Normal sounds. Nothing wrong. But as Claire walked toward the trailhead, toward the path Jasper had refused for 5 days. She felt what the donkey must have felt. That weight in the air, that sense of being watched. And when she reached the mouth of the trail and shone her lantern into the darkness, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Fresh boot prints. Human boot prints. Leading down the trail she'd walked that afternoon. Someone else had been here. Someone who'd waited until she'd left, then followed her path to the beaver pond. Someone who knew she'd found the box. And they'd been here recently, within the last few hours. The edges of the prints were still sharp, undisturbed by wind or animals. Claire backed away from the trail slowly, keeping her lantern pointed at the ground so it wouldn't announce her position. Her hand found a rifle slung across her shoulder, and she brought it around to a ready position. Jasper had known. 5 days ago, maybe longer, he'd sensed that something was wrong, that someone was watching, that the forest trail, once safe, had become dangerous. And Claire had dismissed his fear, had tried to force him past it, had gone down that trail alone, exposed and unaware. She'd gotten lucky today. Whoever owned those boot prints had either not arrived yet or had held back, observing. But her luck wouldn't hold forever. Claire turned and walked quickly back to her cabin, her mind already working through what she needed to do. She had evidence. Evidence that could expose a cover-up that had lasted nearly 50 years. Evidence that might explain her father's death and reveal mineral deposits worth billions. But she was alone, 8 years removed from civilization, with no phone, no internet, no way to call for help. And someone knew she was here. Someone who'd already killed to keep this secret. The question wasn't whether they'd come for her. The question was how much time she had before they did. Claire didn't sleep that night. She sat at her table with a rifle across her lap, watching the darkness beyond her windows, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Every crack of settling timber made her flinch. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. But no one came. By the time gray light began filtering through the trees, she'd made her decision. She couldn't stay here, isolated and vulnerable, waiting for whoever had left those boot prints to come back. She needed to get the documents to someone who could do something with them. Someone with authority, with resources, with the power to investigate. But more than that, she needed to understand what she'd stumbled into, who her father had really been, why he'd died, and whether the land she'd been living on for 8 years was actually hers by right of inheritance or just a cosmic coincidence that had put her in the crosshairs of something much larger than herself. The nearest town was Elk Bend, the same supply station where she stocked up twice a year for the past 8 years. It was a 3-day ride south, through country she knew reasonably well. The man who ran the station, Harlan Birch, was taciturn and incurious, which was why she'd chosen to do business with him. He asked no questions, made no judgments, accepted her cash and sent her on her way. But Elk Bend also had a library, a small one, just 2 rooms in the back of the community center, but with internet access and newspaper archives. If she could get there, she could research her father's death, the mining company, the wilderness designation. She could start building a picture of what had really happened in 1974. And Elk Bend had a sheriff's office. Not much of one, just a satellite station for the county, staffed part-time by a deputy. But it was law enforcement, official, someone she could give the documents to if things went wrong. Claire packed methodically as dawn strengthened into full morning. She filled her saddlebags with supplies for a week-long trip, dried food, matches, her camp stove, bedroll, extra ammunition. She filled her canteen from her dwindling water supply, knowing she'd have to find more on the trail. She wrapped the metal box in canvas and secured it carefully in one of the panniers, cushioned by her extra clothes. She left most of her belongings in the cabin, the books she'd accumulated, the tools she'd built her life with, the small comforts she created. If she came back, they'd be here. If she didn't, they wouldn't matter. The hardest part was saying goodbye to the place itself. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at the space she'd built from nothing, the table where she'd eaten solitary meals, the stove that had kept her alive through 8 winters, the loft where she'd slept and woken and slowly learned to exist without Daniel. This cabin had saved her life. And now, she was leaving it behind to save something else. The truth maybe, or justice for a father she'd never known, or maybe just herself one more time. Jasper was more than willing to be saddled. He practically danced in place as Claire tightened the cinch, as if he'd been waiting for days for permission to leave. Smart animal. He'd known they needed to go before she had. "All right, boy," she murmured, running her hand down his neck. "You were right. We should have listened to you sooner." They set out heading south, avoiding the eastern trail entirely. Claire chose a longer route, one that would take them over rougher terrain, but keep them away from whoever might be watching the main paths. She'd learned these mountains well enough to navigate without established trails. The compass Daniel had carried would keep her oriented, and her knowledge of water sources and landmarks would fill in the rest. The first day passed without incident. They climbed through dense timber, crossed a high ridge where the wind cut sharp enough to make Claire pull her jacket tight, then descended into a long valley where a creek ran swift and cold. Claire filled her water jugs there, treating the water with the iodine tablets she kept for this purpose. They tasted metallic and chemical, but the water was safe. That night, she camped in a small hollow protected by rock outcrops. She built no fire, unwilling to announce her position. Instead, she ate cold jerky and hard biscuits, drank treated water, and tried to sleep wrapped in her bedroll with Jasper standing guard nearby. She managed maybe 3 hours of fitful rest before the dreams woke her. Daniel, standing in their old kitchen, telling her something urgent, but his voice was too quiet, too distant. She couldn't make out the words. She kept trying to move closer, but the distance between them stretched like taffy, infinite and impossible. She woke with tears on her face and a hollow ache in her chest that felt as fresh as it had 8 years ago. The second day was harder. The terrain grew steeper, rockier. Jasper picked his way carefully through boulder fields and across scree slopes where loose stones shifted under his hooves. Claire walked beside him more often than she rode, unwilling to risk his footing with her weight on his back. They were making slower progress than she'd hoped. By her estimate, they were maybe halfway to Elk Bend, which meant another day and a half of travel, at least. She kept scanning the forest around them, looking for signs of pursuit, but she saw nothing. No human tracks. No evidence anyone was following. Maybe she was being paranoid. Maybe the boot prints had belonged to a hiker, someone passing through. Maybe whoever had buried the evidence in 1974 was long dead or long gone. The whole conspiracy dissolved by time and irrelevance. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. It was late afternoon when she heard the sound. A helicopter, distant but unmistakable. The rhythmic thump of rotors cutting through mountain air. Claire's heart kicked into overdrive. Helicopters didn't come out here. This was wilderness. Protected land. No motorized vehicles allowed. No aircraft except for emergency rescue operations. She urged Jasper into the cover of thick pines and stood watching the sky through the canopy. The sound grew louder, closer. Then she saw it, a black helicopter flying low, following what looked like a search pattern, looking for something, or someone. The helicopter passed maybe half a mile to the east, close enough that Claire could see the lack of any markings on its sides. Not Forest Service, not Park Service, not search and rescue. Private, corporate, something that didn't want to be identified. Claire waited until the sound faded completely before moving again. When she did, she pushed Jasper harder, covering ground faster, trading caution for speed. They needed to reach Elk Bend, needed to get these documents into official hands before whoever was in that helicopter found her, because they were looking. No question now. And if they brought a helicopter, they had resources, money, organization. They had everything she didn't. Section 5, the deeper secret, second layer revelation. Claire reached Elk Bend just before sunset on the third day. The town, if you could call it that, consisted of maybe 20 buildings clustered around a crossroads where 2 gravel roads met. Harlan Supply Station, the community center with its attached library, a combination gas station and diner, the satellite sheriff's office, a few houses. That was it. Population, maybe 60 people, most of them living on outlying ranches and homesteads scattered through the surrounding valleys. Claire hadn't been here since late September, 6 weeks ago. She'd ridden in, restocked her supplies, exchanged maybe 10 words with Harlan, and ridden out. Quick, efficient, no complications. But this time, she needed more than supplies. She tied Jasper to the rail outside the community center and walked inside on legs that felt strange and unstable after 3 days in the saddle. The library was in the back. 2 small rooms lined with donated books and a couple of ancient computers on a table against one wall. The librarian was a woman Claire had seen before but never spoken to, maybe 60, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked up as Claire entered, and something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "Help you find something?" the woman asked. Her voice was careful, neutral. "I need to use a computer," Claire said, "and I need to look at newspaper archives. Old ones, from 1974. The woman's eyebrows rose slightly. "Most of our archives are microfiche. You know how to use a microfiche reader?" "I'll figure it out." The woman stood, moving with the deliberate slowness of someone whose joints hurt. "I'm Mary Carver. Don't think we've been properly introduced, though I've seen you come through town. Claire Hartwell." Something changed in Mary's expression, a tightening around her eyes. "Hartwell," she repeated. "That's an old name around here." Claire's pulse quickened. "Is it—" Mary studied her for a long moment. Then she gestured toward a back corner, where a bulky machine sat on a table. "Microfiche readers over there. Files are organized by year and month. What specifically are you looking for?" "Anything about Elk Ridge Mining Company. And anything about a plane crash in September 1974. Mary's face went completely still. "That's very specific." "I found something," Claire said. "Something that was buried a long time ago. I need to understand what it means." Mary looked toward the library entrance, as if checking whether anyone else was listening. Then she lowered her voice. "You need to be careful asking about that. Elk Ridge Mining is a name people around here don't say out loud." "Why not?" "Because people who ask questions about Elk Ridge Mining had a habit of leaving town. Or worse." Mary's eyes were sharp behind her glasses. "My husband worked for them, back in the 70s. He was a surveyor. Good man, honest man. He saw things he wasn't supposed to see, and he told me about them because we didn't keep secrets from each other." Claire's throat felt tight. "What kind of things?" "The kind that got him killed." Mary's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "Car accident," they said. "Brake failure. But my husband checked his brakes every week like clockwork. That car was maintained better than most people maintain their marriages." "When did this happen?" "October 1974. 3 weeks after the plane crash that killed the survey team." Claire felt cold spreading through her chest. "You know about the plane crash. Everyone around here knows about the plane crash. Or knew, back then. 3 geologists, all of them good men, all of them on their way to Washington to testify before some congressional committee about mineral deposits on federal land." Mary's jaw tightened. "Plane went down in bad weather. Mechanical failure. Very convenient timing. One of them was James Hartwell." Mary's eyes widened slightly. "Your father?" "I think so. I was too young to remember him. My mother never talked about what happened. Probably for good reason," Mary said quietly. "After the plane crash, after my husband died, the company made it very clear that people should stop asking questions. They bought silence, paid off families, relocated anyone who seemed likely to cause trouble. The whole thing got buried, and most folks were happy to let it stay buried." "But you remember." "I remember." Mary's expression was hard. "And I've been waiting 49 years for someone to give a damn." Claire pulled out one of the waterproof bags she'd been carrying inside her jacket. Inside was a photograph from the metal box, one showing the survey team. She handed it to Mary. Mary took it with trembling hands. She stared at the image for a long moment, then pointed to a figure on the right side of the group. "That's my husband, Thomas Carver. He was 28 when that picture was taken, 31 when he died." Then she pointed to another man, the one Claire had thought might be her father. And that's James Hartwell. He worked with Tom. They were friends. Good friends. Tom used to say Jim was the smartest geologist he'd ever met and the most honest. That was his problem. He wouldn't look the other way when he found something wrong. What did he find? Mary set the photograph down carefully. You should look at the microfiche. I'll help you find the right reels. But first, I need to know what you're planning to do with whatever you found. Take it to the sheriff, or the FBI, someone who can investigate. The sheriff's office here is staffed by Deputy Kendrick. He's been on the job for 6 months, fresh out of the academy, doesn't know the history. Mary's voice was measured, but his boss, the county sheriff, is Raymond Talbot. And Raymond Talbot's brother worked for Elk Ridge Mining back in the day. Still collects a very generous pension from their successor company. Claire felt the ground shifting beneath her. The sheriff is compromised. I wouldn't trust him with anything that matters if I were you. Mary looked at her steadily. Whatever you found, whatever you're planning to do with it, you need to understand that Elk Ridge Mining might be gone, but the people who benefited from their crimes are still here, still connected, still invested in keeping the past buried. Then who can I trust? Mary was quiet for a moment, thinking. There's a federal prosecutor in Missoula, woman named Patricia Carnes. She's new, appointed last year, made her career going after corporate fraud. If anyone would take this seriously, it would be her. Missoula is 100 miles from here, closer to 120. But there's a satellite ranger station about 40 miles south, at Copper Creek. They've got satellite phones, internet. You could call Carnes from there, or send her the documents electronically. Claire thought about the helicopter, about the boot prints at the trailhead. Someone's looking for me. They sent a helicopter yesterday, searching. Mary's expression darkened. Then you don't have much time. Come on, let's find what you need in the archives. And then you need to leave town before anyone notices you're here. They worked quickly, pulling reels of microfiche from careful storage. Mary showed Claire how to load them into the reader, how to navigate through pages of old newspaper. September and October 1974. The local paper had been weekly back then, just 8 pages of regional news and classified ads. But the story was there. Small articles buried on inside pages, but there, 3 geologists die in plane crash. Elk Ridge Mining suspends operations after federal inquiry. Wilderness designation protects Hartwell Ridge. And smaller still, easier to miss. Local surveyor dies in car accident. Claire read through each article 3 times, committing details to memory. The plane had crashed in bad weather, but several witnesses had reported seeing it before the crash. One witness, a rancher, said it looked like the plane was struggling with engine trouble before it went down. Another said they'd heard what sounded like an explosion just before impact. The official investigation had ruled it mechanical failure, but the bodies had been too badly burned to determine whether the crash had killed the men or whether something else had happened first. The wilderness designation had come through fast, unusually fast, pushed by senators who'd previously shown no interest in conservation, approved without the usual environmental review, as if someone very powerful had wanted that land locked away immediately, permanently. And Elk Ridge Mining had quietly dissolved 6 months later, its assets absorbed by a larger corporation, a corporation that still existed, still operated mines across the western United States. Black Peak Resources. Claire looked up from the microfiche reader, her mind connecting pieces. Black Peak Resources. Are they still active in this area? Mary nodded slowly. They own mineral rights to about half the county. They've been trying for years to get permission to mine in areas adjacent to the wilderness. Keep getting turned down because the environmental impact would be too severe. But if they could prove the wilderness designation was fraudulent, based on a cover-up, they could challenge it, maybe even get it overturned. Mary's face was grim. That land is worth billions, Claire. Maybe tens of billions, depending on what's actually under there. People have killed for a lot less. Claire stood up from the microfiche reader, her legs unsteady. I need to make copies of these articles. And I need to get to Copper Creek before whoever's looking for me figures out where I am. Mary was already moving toward a printer. I'll copy everything. You go get your donkey ready. There's a trail that heads south from behind the community center. Old logging road that's mostly grown over. It'll get you to Copper Creek without using the main routes. Takes longer, but you'll be less visible. Why are you helping me?" Mary paused, her hand on the printer controls. "Because my husband died trying to do the right thing. Because your father died trying to do the right thing. And because I'm tired of watching good people stay silent while bastards profit from murder." She started the printer, and pages began sliding out. Articles, maps, documents, evidence. "There's something else," Mary said, not looking at Claire. "Something Tom told me the night before he died. He said Jim Hartwell had found proof that Elkridge wasn't just hiding mineral deposits. They were lying about what kind of deposits. The rare earth elements weren't just valuable. They were strategic, military applications, the kind of thing the government would kill to control. But the government protected the land. The government had a choice," Mary said. "Let a private company extract resources that could end up being sold to foreign powers, or lock the land away and keep it as an emergency reserve, something they could tap if there was ever a national crisis." Claire felt pieces clicking into place. So the wilderness designation wasn't about protecting the environment. It was about protecting national security. And anyone who knew the truth, anyone who could prove what was really under that mountain, became a liability. Mary handed Claire the stack of copied documents. "Your father wasn't killed by Elkridge mining. He was killed by people who decided 3 lives were an acceptable cost for keeping a strategic resource under government control. That's conspiracy to commit murder. That's 50 years old, and most of the people involved are dead or retired." Mary's voice was hard. "But Black Peak knows the truth. They inherited Elkridge's records. They know what's under Hartwell Ridge, and they've been waiting for an opportunity to get it." Claire's hand went to the metal box in her saddlebag. "The documents I found. If they prove the wilderness designation was based on fraud, then Black Peak can challenge it, can claim the designation was illegitimate, can potentially gain access to billions in mineral rights." Mary looked at her directly. "You found evidence that could either expose a 50-year-old cover-up or hand a fortune to the people who helped commit murder, depending on who gets it first. Then I make sure the right people get it. And you'd better do it fast," Mary said, "because if you saw a helicopter yesterday, Black Peak already knows you're out here, already knows you found something. They'll be searching every town, every trail, every possible route you might take." Claire folded the documents carefully and tucked them into her jacket. "Thank you. For the help. For the truth. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you make it to Copper Creek alive." Mary walked her to the door, then hesitated. "Your father, Jim, he was a good man. Tom thought the world of him. Said he never met anyone who cared more about doing things right." Claire's throat tightened. "I wish I'd known him. He would have been proud of you. Coming back here, finishing what he started." Mary squeezed her arm. "Now go, and don't stop for anything." Section 6. The threat escalates external pressure. Claire led Jasper around the back of the community center, finding the overgrown trail Mary had described. It was barely visible, just a depression in the earth where vehicle tires had once compressed soil. Now it was thick with undergrowth, narrow enough that Claire had to walk ahead of Jasper, pushing branches aside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Beautiful and indifferent, Claire wanted to ride through the night, put as much distance between herself and Elk Bend as possible. But the trail was too rough, too overgrown. She'd risk Jasper breaking a leg. She'd have to camp somewhere and hope that darkness would protect her. They traveled for about 2 hours, moving slowly through the twilight, before Claire found a suitable spot. A small clearing off the main trail, tucked against a rock outcrop that would provide both shelter and concealment. She tied Jasper where he could graze on sparse grass, then set up her bedroll in the space between the rocks. No fire again, just cold food and treated water. She sat with her back against stone, the rifle across her lap, and watched darkness settle over the forest. The documents from Mary were in her jacket. The metal box with her father's survey notes was in the pannier. Between the two, she had enough evidence to expose what had really happened in 1974. Enough to prove that James Hartwell and his team had died because they'd found something too valuable to be left in private hands. But she also had evidence that could hand Black Peak Resources the legal ammunition to challenge the wilderness designation, to claim the government had acted fraudulently, to potentially open 49 years of protected land to commercial exploitation. The question was what would happen when she turned it over to authorities. Would they use it to pursue justice? Or would they bury it again, deciding that some truths were too dangerous to expose? Claire was still wrestling with that question when she heard the sound. A vehicle, distant but approaching. Engine noise that didn't belong in wilderness. She stood quickly, grabbing the rifle. The sound was coming from the direction of Elk Bend, following the old logging road. Getting closer. Headlights appeared through the trees, bouncing and swaying as the vehicle navigated rough terrain. A truck, by the sound of it. Maybe two. They were following her trail. Claire's mind raced. She could hide, hope they passed by without spotting her campsite. Or she could move now, take Jasper, and disappear into forest before the vehicles got close enough of their headlights to reach her. But moving in full darkness through unknown forest was dangerous. And Jasper, despite his mountain savvy, could panic, could make noise that would give away their position. She made a decision. She grabbed the metal box on the pannier, took the documents from her jacket, and shoved them deep into her saddlebag. Then she grabbed Jasper's lead rope and pulled him deeper into the trees, away from the clearing, into a thick stand of pine where the darkness was absolute. "Quiet, boy," she whispered, pressing her hand against the donkey's muzzle. "Quiet." Jasper's ears swiveled nervously, but he obeyed, standing still as the engine noise grew louder. Two trucks appeared on the trail, their headlights cutting through darkness. They stopped at the clearing where Claire had been camped minutes before. 4 men got out, all carrying flashlights, all carrying weapons. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. She kept her hand on Jasper's muzzle, kept absolutely still. She was here. One of the men said, play his flashlight over the disturbed ground. Recent, maybe an hour ago. Check the area. She can't have gone far on foot. They spread out, searching. Claire watched through the trees as their flashlight beams swept back and forth. One of them passed within 10 feet of where she was hiding, close enough that she could see his face in the backwash of his flashlight. Young, maybe 30, hard expression. The kind of man who'd been hired for his willingness to do things good men wouldn't do. Nothing. The man called. If she's here, she's deep in the trees. Mark the location. Another voice said, older, more authoritative. We'll come back with thermal imaging at first light. She's got nowhere to go. We control every road out here, and she doesn't know we're watching the ranger station at Copper Creek. Claire's blood ran cold. They knew where she was heading. They'd already positioned people to intercept her. The men returned to their trucks. One of them spoke into a radio. Base, this is Team 2. We found evidence at Checkpoint 3, but no contact. Subject is on foot, heading south. We'll resume search at 0500 with aerial support. Aerial support. The helicopter. The truck started up again and continued down the trail, deeper into the forest, searching for her farther south, assuming she'd kept moving. Claire waited until the engine noise faded completely. Then she waited another 30 minutes, listening to the forest, making sure they hadn't left anyone behind to watch the clearing. Only when she was certain did she move, leading Jasper back toward the trail. Not south, toward Copper Creek, where they'd be waiting. North, back toward Elk Bend, then west into country she didn't know well. She couldn't reach the ranger station. That route was compromised. She needed another option, another way to get this evidence into official hands before Black Peak's people found her. Claire thought about what Mary had said. Federal prosecutor in Missoula, Patricia Carnes, 120 miles away. Too far to reach on horseback before they found her, but maybe not too far to reach if she could find a phone, a way to contact Carnes directly, to tell her story, send her the evidence electronically, and let someone with actual power take over the investigation. There was a fire lookout tower about 20 miles west of here. Claire remembered. She'd seen it on maps when she'd first been exploring this area. Old structure, probably abandoned now. But fire lookouts usually had communication equipment, radios at minimum, maybe even a landline if the structure was old enough to predate satellite phones. It was a long shot, but it was better than walking into a trap at Copper Creek. Claire checked her compass, oriented herself, and started walking west, leading Jasper through darkness that felt alive with threat. Behind her, somewhere in the forest, men with guns were searching. Above her, by morning, a helicopter would be scanning the terrain with thermal cameras. And ahead of her, 20 miles of rough country stood between her and a tower that might or might not still have functioning equipment. She thought about her father, about James Hartwell walking a similar path 49 years ago, carrying evidence of a crime he'd uncovered, trying to do the right thing, believing that truth mattered more than money or power. He died for that belief. Claire tightened her grip on Jasper's lead rope and kept walking. She wouldn't die for it. She'd survive it, would finish what her father started, would make sure that this time the truth didn't get buried with the people who tried to tell it, even if she had to walk through darkness with men hunting her to do it. Claire walked through the night, navigating by compass and starlight. The forest was different here, unfamiliar. The trees grew closer together, and the undergrowth was thicker, grabbing at her legs with every step. Jasper followed with patient trust, his hooves finding purchase on terrain that would have defeated a horse. By the time gray light began filtering through the canopy, they'd covered maybe 8 miles. Claire's legs burned with exhaustion, and her feet had gone numb hours ago. She'd stopped twice to rest, dozing fitfully against tree trunks while Jasper stood guard. Never for more than 20 minutes. Never long enough to truly sleep. She couldn't afford rest. Not yet. The sound of the helicopter returned just after dawn. Claire heard it before she saw it, that distinctive thump of rotors echoing off the mountains. She pulled Jasper into the densest timber she could find and stood watching through the canopy as the black aircraft passed overhead, flying a search pattern. It was equipped with something mounted under its belly. Camera equipment, probably thermal imaging like the men had mentioned, technology that could detect body heat through tree cover. Claire looked at Jasper, at herself, at the heat signatures they'd be throwing off. 2 living creatures in a forest full of living creatures. Bears, deer, elk, all putting out thermal signatures. Would they be able to distinguish human from animal? Probably, if they got close enough. If they were using sophisticated enough equipment. She needed to think like prey, like something hunted. Claire remembered reading about soldiers evading thermal detection. They'd use cold water, mud, anything to lower their surface temperature and confuse the imaging. She didn't have time for that, but she had something else. A small creek ran maybe 30 yards to her left, barely visible through the trees. Claire led Jasper to it, then did something that felt insane but necessary. She stripped off her jacket and shirt and waded into the water up to her waist. The cold was shocking, stealing her breath. Mountain runoff, probably 40 degrees. But she forced herself to stay in it, dousing her upper body, soaking her hair, making herself as cold as the environment around her. Then she did the same to Jasper, using her hands to splash water over his back and flanks. The donkey tolerated it with surprised patience, ears swiveling in confusion. "I know, boy," she whispered through chattering teeth. "I know it's crazy, but trust me." She pulled her clothes back on over wet skin, the fabric clinging and miserable. Then she led Jasper under the thickest canopy she could find and stood perfectly still as the helicopter made another pass. It came closer this time, hovering maybe a quarter mile to the east. Claire could hear the change in engine pitch as it slowed, searching. Her whole body shook with cold and adrenaline. Then the helicopter moved on, continuing its search pattern to the south. Claire waited until the sound faded completely before moving again. Her clothes were starting to freeze in the morning air, stiff and crackling. She needed to get moving, needed to generate body heat before hypothermia became a real risk. She pushed on, moving as fast as the terrain allowed. By mid-morning, she'd covered another 6 miles. The fire lookout tower should be close now, maybe 6 or 7 miles ahead, but she was running on fumes. Her water was gone. She'd eaten the last of her food hours ago, and her body was starting to shut down, muscles cramping, vision blurring at the edges. She needed to rest, just for an hour, just enough to regain some strength. Claire found a sheltered spot beneath an overhang of rock and tied Jasper where he could reach some grass. Then she wrapped herself in her bedroll and closed her eyes, intending to sleep for just a little while. She woke to Jasper's urgent braying. Claire jerked upright, disoriented. The sun had moved. Hours had passed. She'd slept longer than she'd meant to, exhaustion dragging her under deeper than she'd intended. And Jasper was terrified. The donkey was pulling against his rope, ears pinned flat, eyes showing white. The same fear he'd shown at the forest trail. The same instinctive knowledge that danger was close. Claire grabbed her rifle and stood, her body protesting every movement. She scanned the forest around her, looking for whatever had spooked Jasper. Then she saw them, 3 men, approaching from different directions, moving quietly, professionally, surrounding her position. They'd found her. Claire's mind raced through options. She could run, but they'd catch her. She was exhausted on foot, and they were fresh. She could hide, but they'd already spotted her position. Or she could fight. 3 armed men against 1 exhausted woman with a hunting rifle. The math wasn't good, but Claire had something they didn't. She had nothing left to lose. Daniel was gone. Her old life was gone. The only thing she had left was the truth her father had died for, and she'd be damned if she let these men bury it again. She shouldered the rifle, aiming at the nearest man. "That's far enough," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. The men stopped. The one she'd targeted, a lean man in his 40s with military bearing, held up one hand. "Ms. Hartwell, we're not here to hurt you. We just want to talk. You've been hunting me for 2 days. That's not talking. We've been trying to reach you, to explain the situation." The man's voice was calm, reasonable, the voice of someone trained in negotiation. "My name is Marcus Webb. I work for Black Peak Resources. We know you found the Elk Ridge survey documents. We know what they contain." Claire kept the rifle steady. "Then you know your company covered up murder. That was a different company. Different people. Different time." Webb took a careful step forward. "Black Peak acquired Elk Ridge's assets, but we're not responsible for crimes committed before we existed. We're a legitimate mining operation. We follow environmental regulations. We want to work with you, not against you. By sending armed men to hunt me through the forest? By trying to protect you from making a mistake that could destroy you." Webb's tone sharpened slightly. "You have documents that could challenge the wilderness designation. Documents that prove the designation was based on fraudulent grounds. If you turn those over federal authorities, you'll trigger a legal battle that will last decades. And you'll be right in the middle of it." "Good. That's exactly what I want." "Is it?" Webb gestured around at the forest. "You've lived out here alone for 8 years. You built a life away from people, away from scrutiny. If you expose this, your life becomes public property. Every news outlet, every conspiracy theorist, every lawyer and lobbyist and corporate investigator will descend on you. They'll dig into your past, your mental health, your credibility. They'll paint you as an unstable recluse with delusions, and they'll bury you in litigation until you wish you'd never found that box." Claire's arms were starting to shake from holding the rifle, but she didn't lower it. "My father died trying to expose this. I'm not backing down." "Your father died because he didn't understand the bigger picture." Webb's voice softened. "James Hartwell was a good geologist, an honest man, but he didn't realize he was threatening national security. The rare earth deposits under Hartwell Ridge aren't just valuable. They're strategic. Military applications. If that land had been open to private mining in 1974, those resources could have ended up in foreign hands. The government made a hard choice. 3 lives to protect something that could affect millions. That's not a choice. That's murder. That's war." Webb met her eyes. "The Cold War was real, Ms. Hartwell. The threats were real. Sometimes good people died to prevent worse outcomes. Your father's death was tragic, but it served a purpose." Claire felt rage building in her chest. Don't you dare justify what happened to him. I'm not justifying it. I'm explaining it. Webb took another step. But that war is over. The Soviet Union is gone. The strategic situation has changed. Those resources don't need to be locked away anymore. They can be developed responsibly, creating jobs, generating revenue, strengthening the economy. Black Peak wants to do that, and we're willing to make sure you're compensated for your role in making it possible. You want to buy me off. We want to make you a partner. Webb pulled a folded document from his jacket. This is a contract. It guarantees you $20 million, paid over 10 years. In exchange, you turn over the Elk Ridge documents to us. We use them to challenge the wilderness designation through proper legal channels. You consult on the project, ensuring environmental protections are maintained. Everyone wins. $20 million. The number was so absurd, Claire almost laughed. 8 years ago, before Daniel died, before she'd run to the mountains, that much money would have been unimaginable wealth. Now it felt like an insult. I don't want your money. Then what do you want? Webb's patience was starting to fray. Justice for your father? That's 50 years too late. The people who killed him are dead or dying. Revenge? Against who? A corporation that didn't exist when the crime was committed? Truth? You already have the truth. You know what happened. What more do you think you'll accomplish by going public? Claire thought about Mary Carver, about a woman who'd spent 49 years waiting for someone to care, about all the other families who'd lost people to convenient accidents and mechanical failures, and lives wrapped in national security. I want the truth on the record, she said. I want my father's name cleared. I want everyone to know he died trying to do the right thing, not because of bad luck or bad weather. I want the people who covered it up exposed, even if they're dead. I want history to remember what really happened. History doesn't care, Webb said flatly. History is written by people with power and money, and Black Peak has both. If you try to fight us, we'll destroy you. We'll tie you up in lawsuits for the rest of your life. We'll discredit your evidence. We'll paint you as a mentally unstable woman with a vendetta. And when you're broken and nobody believes a word you say, we'll still get what we want. The only difference is you'll get nothing. Claire's finger moved to the trigger. Get off my mountain. This isn't your mountain. This is federal land. And soon, if we have our way, it'll be ours. Webb's smile was cold. Last chance, Ms. Hartwell. Take the money. Walk away. Live whatever life you want somewhere far from here. Or stay and watch us take everything anyway. I said get off my mountain. Webb stared at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly. You're making a mistake. He gestured to the other two men, and they began backing away, disappearing into the trees. But before Webb left, he turned back. The helicopter will keep searching. We have teams on every route out of here. You won't make it to Copper Creek. You won't make it to any ranger station. And eventually, you'll run out of food, water, and options. When that happens, we'll still be here. And the offer will be a lot less generous. Then he was gone, swallowed by the forest. Claire stood shaking, the rifle still raised, until she was certain they'd truly left. Then her legs gave out, and she sat down hard, adrenaline draining away and leaving her hollow. $20 million. They'd offered her $20 million, which meant the mineral rights under Hartwell Ridge were worth far, far more. And they were desperate enough to offer that kind of money to a woman. They could just as easily kill and bury where no one would ever find her, which meant they still needed her alive, needed her cooperation. For some reason, taking the documents by force wasn't enough. They needed her to give them up willingly. Claire's mind worked through the implications. If they killed her and took the documents, it would look suspicious. People in Elk Bend knew she'd been researching the plane crash. Mary Carver could testify that Claire had found evidence. Her death would trigger questions, investigations. But if she voluntarily turned over the documents in exchange for money, signed a contract, became a partner in the mining operation, then any questions about the wilderness designation would look like legitimate legal challenges rather than corporate theft. They needed her complicit, not dead, which meant she still had leverage, still had power. Claire stood up slowly, her mind clearing. She untied Jasper and checked her compass. The fire lookout was still her best option, if it had communication equipment. She could contact a federal prosecutor, could send the documents electronically before Black Peak, could intercept her physically. She just had to get there before they figured out where she was going. Section 8, the victory resolution achieved. The fire lookout appeared through the trees just before sunset. It was a wooden structure on stilts, maybe 40 feet tall, with a small enclosed cabin at the top. The paint was peeling and the stairs looked questionable, but the tower was still standing. More importantly, there was a solar panel mounted on the roof, which meant there might be power. Claire approached cautiously, scanning for any sign that Black Peak's people had found the tower first. But the area looked undisturbed. No fresh tire tracks, no boot prints, no evidence of recent human activity. She tied Jasper at the base of the tower and started climbing. The stairs creaked ominously under her weight, and more than once she felt a board shift beneath her boot. But she made it to the top and pulled herself onto the small platform. The door to the cabin was unlocked. Inside was a space maybe 10 feet square, windows on all sides providing 360-degree views of surrounding mountains. There was a small desk, a chair, and most importantly, a radio console and a satellite phone mounted on the wall. Claire picked up the satellite phone, her hands shaking. The battery indicator showed a quarter charge. The solar panel was working, but barely. She'd have maybe one call before the power died. She pulled out the documents Mary had given her, found a number for the federal prosecutor's office in Missoula, and dialed. The phone rang 3 times. Then a recorded message. You've reached the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Montana. Our office hours are Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. If this is an emergency. Claire hung up. It was Saturday evening. The office was closed. She stared at the phone, feeling despair wash over her. She'd come all this way, survived pursuit and threats and exhaustion, and she couldn't reach anyone who mattered. Then she remembered something. Mary had said Patricia Carnes made her career going after corporate fraud. Someone that dedicated didn't keep office hours. She'd have a personal number, an emergency line, something. Claire dialed information, asked for any published numbers for Patricia Carnes in Missoula. The operator gave her 2. One was the office, which she'd already tried. The other was listed as a cell phone, though the operator warned it might not be current. Claire dialed, holding her breath. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more incredible mountain stories, like this one. The phone rang once, twice, then a woman's voice, sharp and professional. Carnes. Ms. Carnes? My name is Claire Hartwell. I need to report a murder, actually multiple murders, and a conspiracy that's been covered up for 50 years. There was a pause. Then, is this a prank call? Because I don't appreciate. My father was James Hartwell. He was a geologist for Elk Ridge Mining Company. In September 1974, he died in a plane crash along with 2 colleagues. They were on their way to testify before Congress about mineral deposits on federal land. The crash was ruled mechanical failure, but it was a sabotage, and I have the documents to prove it. Another pause, longer this time. When Carnes spoke again, her tone was different. Focus. Where are you right now? Fire Lookout Tower, about 40 miles west of Oak Bend. I'm being hunted by people from Black Peak Resources. They've offered me $20 million to turn over the evidence and keep quiet. I refused, and now they're trying to prevent me from reaching authorities. Are you safe right now? For the moment, but they have helicopters, thermal imaging teams on the ground. I can't stay ahead of them much longer. I need you to listen very carefully. Carnes's voice was calm, authoritative. I'm going to coordinate with the FBI field office in Kalispell. They can have agents at your location within 2 hours. Can you hold out that long? I think so, but there's a problem. If Black Peak's people see FBI agents coming, they'll disappear. They'll deny everything. It'll be their word against mine, and I'm just an unstable recluse who's been living alone in the mountains for 8 years. Let me worry about building a case. Your job is to stay alive and protect that evidence. I can do better than protect it. Claire looked at the radio console, at the satellite uplink equipment. This tower has communication equipment. If I can figure out how to work it, I might be able to transmit the documents electronically. You have copies even if they take the originals from me. Can you operate that equipment? Claire looked at the console. It was old, probably installed in the 90s, but the interface looked straightforward. Radio controls, a data transmission panel. Even what looked like a fax machine built into the console. I think so. Give me your fax number. Carnes rattled off a number. Claire wrote it down, then started examining the equipment. The power was on, the solar panel providing enough charge to keep the systems running. She found the fax machine's manual in a drawer, yellowed and dog-eared but still legible. I'm going to start transmitting, Claire said into the satellite phone. It might take a while. There are a lot of documents. Take your time. I'll wait on the line. Claire pulled the first document from the metal box. Her father's survey notes, dated June 1974. She fed it into the fax machine, entered Carnes's number, and pressed send. The machine whirred to life, pulling the paper through, transmitting it line by line. It took almost 2 minutes for the first page to send. Claire did the math. She had maybe 60 pages of documents. At 2 minutes per page, that was 2 hours. She started feeding pages through, one after another. Survey maps, mineral assessments, corporate memos, the newspaper article about the plane crash, Mary's husband's notes, her father's field journal pages, evidence, truth, 50 years of buried secrets transmitted through aging technology to a federal prosecutor who'd listened when Claire called. Outside the tower, the sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of orange and purple. Claire watched the light change while the fax machine worked, while her story became official record, while the past finally caught up to the present. She was on page 43 when she heard the helicopter. It was closer this time, heading directly toward the tower. They'd figured out where she was. They're coming, Claire said into the phone. Keep transmitting, Carnes said. FBI is 20 minutes out. I don't have 20 minutes. Then hold them off. However you have to. Claire looked at the rifle leaning against the wall, at the pages still waiting to be transmitted, at Jasper tied to the base of the tower, exposed and vulnerable. She made a decision. She grabbed the rifle and went to the window. The helicopter was circling the tower, close enough that she could see faces in the cabin. Webb was there, along with 2 others. The helicopter began to descend, looking for a place to land. Claire raised the rifle and fired a shot into the air. Not at the helicopter, just a warning. The aircraft jerked sideways, climbing rapidly. I've got a rifle, Claire called into the phone. I just fired a warning shot. Does that count as self-defense or assault? If they're attempting to prevent you from reporting a crime, it's self-defense. Carnes said, don't fire at them unless they fire first. But you have every right to defend yourself. The helicopter circled higher, staying out of rifle range. But Claire could see movement in the forest below. People on the ground, approaching the tower. She ran to the fax machine. 15 pages left. Faster, she whispered to the machine. Please, faster. But it worked at its own pace, methodical and slow. 2 minutes per page. 30 minutes for the remaining documents. She didn't have 30 minutes. Claire heard footsteps on the tower stairs. Someone climbing, moving fast. She grabbed a rifle and positioned herself at the door. That's far enough, she shouted. I've got a weapon and I'll use it. The footsteps stopped. Then Webb's voice. Ms. Hartwell, this is pointless. We know you're transmitting documents. We know you've been in contact with someone. It doesn't matter. We have lawyers who will tie those documents up in court for decades. We have experts who will discredit them. And we have the resources to make your life hell for as long as you draw breath. Then why are you trying to stop me? Because we're offering you one last chance to do this the easy way. Come down. Bring the documents. Sign the contract. Take the money and walk away. Or stay up there and watch everything you care about burn. Claire's blood went cold. What does that mean? Your cabin, the one you built with your own hands. the place where you've been hiding for 8 years. It would be a shame if something happened to it. Forest fires are so common this time of year. Claire felt rage flooding through her. You touch my cabin and I'll... You'll what? You're 40 miles away. By the time you get back, assuming you survive the trip, there won't be anything left but ash. Webb's voice hardened. This is your last chance. Come down now, or everything you've built disappears. Claire looked at the fax machine. 10 pages left. She looked at the rifle in her hands. She thought about her cabin, about 8 years of her life contained in those simple walls, about the table where she'd eaten solitary meals, about the stove that had kept her alive through brutal winters, about the loft where she'd slept and woken and slowly learned to exist without Daniel. And she realized something. That cabin had saved her life once, but it had also been a cage, a place to hide from grief instead of healing from it, a way to survive instead of truly living. Losing it would hurt, but it wouldn't destroy her. The truth, though, her father's vindication, the exposure crimes that had been buried for 5 decades, that mattered more than wood and stone. Burn it, Claire said. I don't care. You're bluffing. I'm not. I've already lost everything that mattered. A cabin is just a building. Claire's voice was steady, but the truth is permanent. Once I send these documents, once they're in official hands, you can't bury them again. You can destroy my home. You can bankrupt me with lawsuits. You can spend the next 20 years making my life miserable. But you can't unmake what I've done. You can't unring that bell. Silence from the stairs. Then Webb's voice, quieter now. Dangerous. You're going to regret this. Probably. But I'll regret it knowing I did the right thing. Can you say the same? The footsteps retreated. Claire heard voices below, urgent and angry. The helicopter's engine revved, preparing to take off. She ran to the fax machine. 5 pages left. The machine pulled through another page. 4. Then 3. Claire's hands were shaking as she fed the last pages through. Survey maps showing the exact location and extent of the rare earth deposits. The proof that would either expose a government conspiracy or hand Blackpeak the ammunition to challenge the wilderness designation. Either way, the truth would be out. The last page transmitted just as she heard vehicles in the distance. Multiple engines coming fast. Transmission complete, Claire said into the phone. Did you get everything? I got everything, Karn confirmed. And the FBI just arrived. I can hear their sirens. Stay where you are. Don't come down until agents identify themselves. Claire slumped against the wall, exhausted and shaking. Through the tower windows, she could see vehicles approaching. SUVs with government plates. Men and women in FBI windbreakers spreading out around the tower. The helicopter was fleeing, climbing rapidly and heading east. It was over. Claire had won. Section 9, The New Life, Epilogue in Future. 3 months later, Claire stood in a conference room in Missoula, watching Patricia Carnes address a room full of reporters. Today, the U.S. Attorney's Office is announcing indictments against 6 executives of Blackpeak Resources on charges, including conspiracy, evidence tampering, intimidation of witnesses, and destruction of property. Carnes' voice was crisp, professional. We're also reopening the investigation into the 1974 deaths of James Hartwell, Richard Yoon, Thomas Garrett, and Thomas Carver. New evidence suggests these deaths were not accidental, but were part of a deliberate cover-up of illegal activity. The reporters erupted with questions. Carnes fielded them with practiced ease, outlining the case she'd built from the documents Claire had transmitted. The wilderness designation of Hartwell Ridge had been based on legitimate environmental concerns, she explained, but had also been expedited to prevent private companies from accessing strategically important mineral deposits. The designation itself wasn't fraudulent, but the circumstances around it had involved criminal activity that needed to be investigated. Claire sat in the back of the room, watching it all unfold. She'd given her deposition weeks ago, spending hours answering questions from FBI agents and federal prosecutors. She'd turned over the original documents, had them authenticated by experts, had her story verified by Mary Carver and other witnesses who'd finally felt safe enough to come forward. The case was solid. Carnes had said so. The truth was finally on the record, but the cost had been real. Black Peak had made good on their threat. Her cabin had burned 2 days after she transmitted the documents, officially ruled as a wildfire sparked by lightning, though the timing was suspicious. Everything she'd built over 8 years was gone. The table, the stove, the loft, all of it reduced to ash and blackened timbers. Claire had mourned it, but not the way she'd mourned Daniel. This loss felt different, cleaner, like she'd traded something comfortable but confining for something harder, but ultimately more valuable. Freedom, maybe, or purpose. The life she'd built in the mountains had been about survival, about hiding from pain and grief and the unbearable weight of loss. But the past 3 months had been about something else, about fighting, about standing up, about refusing to let good people's deaths be meaningless. After the press conference, Carnes pulled Claire aside. "You doing okay?" "I think so," Claire said. "It's strange being around this many people again." "I can imagine." Carnes studied her. "What are you going to do now? The cabin is gone. Your old life is gone. You got some settlement money coming from Blackbeak for the property destruction, though it won't be much." "I don't need much." "What about your father's land? The place where you built your cabin? Technically, you might have a claim to it. If we can prove your father's death was directly connected to that property, there might be grounds for—" "I don't want it," Claire said. "That land should stay wilderness, should stay protected. My father died trying to keep it out of the wrong hands. I'm not going to be the one who opens it back up." Carnes nodded slowly. "That's probably the right call. But it means you're starting from scratch." "I've done it before." "What will you do?" Claire thought about that. She'd been asking herself the same question for weeks. She couldn't go back to the mountains, not the way she had before. That version of her life was finished. But she also couldn't imagine returning to cities and suburbs and the kind of existence she'd abandoned 8 years ago. She needed something in between, something that honored both the solitude she'd learned to value and the connection she'd rediscovered. "There's a ranger position opening up at Glacier National Park," Claire said. "Backcountry patrol. 3 weeks out, 1 week in. They're looking for someone with wilderness survival skills and comfort with isolation." Carnes smiled. "Sounds perfect for you. I applied last week. I think they're going to offer it to me." "You'd be good at it." Carnes hesitated. "Claire, I want you to know what you did mattered. Your father's name is being cleared. The families of the other victims finally have answers. And we're exposing a pattern of corporate criminality that went unchecked for 5 decades. None of that would have happened without you." Claire felt her throat tighten. "My father started it. I just finished it. You did more than that. You proved that one person with courage can still make a difference, even against people with money and power and every advantage." They talked for a few more minutes. Then Claire excused herself and walked out of the federal building. The November air was cold and sharp, carrying the promise of snow. Not so different from the mountains, really, just louder, more crowded, more complicated. She found a quiet coffee shop and sat by the window, watching people pass by. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, going to work, running errands, meeting friends. The kind of life she'd once had with Daniel. She missed him still, would always miss him. But the grief had changed shape again. It was no longer the crushing weight that had driven her into isolation. It had become something she could carry without being destroyed by it. A scar instead of an open wound. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mary Carver. "Saw the news. Tom will be proud. I'm proud. Call me when you're ready to talk." Claire smiled. She'd visited Mary twice in the past months, and they'd talked for hours about their husbands, about the years lost to silence, about what it meant to finally have truth on the record. Mary was writing everything down, she'd said, a memoir for her grandchildren, so they'd know what their grandfather had died for. Another text, this one from an unknown number. "This is Harlan from Elk Bend. Heard about your cabin. I've got Jasper here if you want him. He's eating me out of house and home." Claire laughed. Jasper. She'd left him with Harlan when she'd come to Missoula to work with the investigators. The donkey who'd known danger was coming before she did. who'd saved her life by refusing to walk a trail that felt wrong. She texted back, "I'll come get him next week. And thank you for taking care of him. He's good company." Smarter than most people, Claire pocketed her phone and looked out the window again. Snow was starting to fall, light flakes drifting down from a gray sky. The first snow of winter. She thought about the ranger job, about spending her days patrolling backcountry trails, about helping hikers who got lost, tracking wildlife, maintaining shelters, about being useful again, about having purpose beyond simple survival. It wouldn't be isolation. Not really. She'd have colleagues, visitors, people who needed her help, but it would still be wilderness. Still be mountains and silence, and the kind of solitude that healed instead of hiding. A different life. Not the one she'd planned when she married Daniel. Not the one she'd built after he died. But maybe a better one. One that honored both the peace she'd found in the mountains and the courage she discovered when she'd had to leave them. Claire finished her coffee and walked outside into the falling snow. She had things to do, a job to prepare for, a donkey to retrieve, a future to build. But first, she had one more place to visit. The cemetery was on the outskirts of Missoula, a peaceful place with old trees and weathered headstones. Claire had never been here before, but she'd asked Carnes for the location. The graves were in a section reserved for unclaimed remains, people whose families hadn't been able to afford private plots. She found her father's headstone easily. It was simple granite, just a name and dates. James Edward Hartwell, 1936 to 1974. No epitaph, no mention of how he died or what he'd been trying to do. Claire knelt in the snow beside the grave. She'd brought flowers, but they felt inadequate somehow. What do you give a man you never knew? A father who died when you were too young to remember his face? "I finished what you started," she said quietly. "It took 50 years, but the truth is out. Everyone knows what you found. Everyone knows you died trying to do the right thing." The wind moved through the trees, carrying snow and silence. "I wish I'd known you," Claire continued. "Mom never talked about you much. I think it hurt too much. But I've been reading your field journals. Mary Carver gave me copies of letters you wrote to her husband. You seem like a good man. Honest. Careful. Someone who cared about doing things right." She paused, feeling the cold seeping through her jeans. "I've been living the way you died. Trying to do the right thing, even when it's hard. Even when it costs everything. I don't know if I'm doing it well, but I'm trying. And I thought you should know that. Thought you should know your daughter turned out okay, even without you there to raise her." Claire stood slowly, her knees protesting. She placed the flowers against the headstone, then stepped back. "Thank you," she said, "for being brave, for refusing to look away, for caring about truth more than safety. You gave me something to live up to. I hope I made you proud." She turned and walked back through the snow, leaving her father to his rest. Behind her, the mountains rose against the horizon, white-capped and eternal, waiting for her to return. And she would return, not to hide this time, but to live, to work, to be part of something larger than her own grief. Claire Hartwell had come to the mountains 8 years ago to escape. She was going back to them now to finally, truly come home. 6 weeks after the press conference, Claire received a letter, not an email or a phone call, but an actual letter delivered to the temporary address she'd given the court, a post office box in Missoula where she collected mail while preparing for the ranger position. The envelope was thick, expensive paper. The return address was New York City. A law firm she didn't recognize, Henderson, Price & Associates. Claire opened it sitting in her truck in the post office parking lot. Jasper visible through the windshield where she tied him to a parking meter. The donkey was attracting attention from passers-by. But Claire had stopped caring about being conspicuous. After 3 months of news coverage, everyone in Missoula knew who she was anyway. The letter inside was formal, typed on letterhead. "Dear Ms. Hartwell, my name is Richard Yoon Jr. You may not know me, but I believe you knew of my father, Dr. Richard Yoon, who died alongside your father in September 1974. Claire's breath caught. She read on. "I was 8 years old when my father died. Like you, I was told it was an accident. Unlike you, I never questioned that story. I accepted it, moved on with my life, and tried not to think too much about what might have been. Then, 3 weeks ago, I saw your press conference on the news. I heard Patricia Carnes describe evidence of murder and conspiracy. I heard your story about finding documents that proved our fathers were killed for what they discovered. For 3 weeks, I've been unable to think about anything else. I've been going through my father's belongings, things my mother kept in storage for 49 years, things I'd never had the courage to examine. I found something I think you need to see. I'm flying to Missoula next week. Would you be willing to meet with me? I promise I'm not representing Black Peak or anyone else with an interest in this case. I'm just a son who finally wants to know the truth about his father's death. Please contact me at the number below. Sincerely, Richard Yoon Jr., M.D. Claire read the letter 3 times. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed a number. A man answered on the second ring. Dr. Yoon, this is Claire Hartwell. I got your letter. There was a pause, then a rush of breath. Thank you for calling. I wasn't sure you would. What did you find? Claire asked, in your father's belongings. I'd rather show you in person, if that's all right. Some things don't translate well over the phone. His voice was careful, educated, older than she'd expected, maybe mid-50s. I land in Missoula on Thursday. Could we meet that evening? Claire thought about it. Carnes had warned her to be cautious about anyone claiming connection to the case. Black Peak had resources, and they'd already tried bribery and intimidation. Deception wasn't beyond them, but something in the man's voice felt genuine. Grief recognizing grief. Thursday evening, she agreed. There's a diner called Maggie's on Highway 93. Meet me there at 6. I'll be there. And Ms. Hartwell, thank you for everything you've done, for not letting them bury this. After they hung up, Claire sat in the truck for a long time, watching snowfall on the windshield. Richard Yoon's son. Another child who'd grown up without a father. Another family that had lived with lies for half a century. She wondered what he'd found. What could possibly be left after 49 years that hadn't already been uncovered? Thursday came cold and clear. Claire arrived at Maggie's diner early, securing a booth in the back where she could watch the door. Old habits from her mountain years. Never sit with your back exposed. Always know your exits. Dr. Richard Yoon arrived exactly at 6. He was a tall man, lean and professorial, with graying hair and his father's features visible in the set of his jaw and the shape of his eyes. He carried a leather briefcase that looked expensive and well-worn. He spotted Claire immediately and walked over, extending his hand. Ms. Hartwell, thank you for meeting me. They shook hands and sat down. A waitress came by, and they both ordered coffee, neither hungry enough for food. When they were alone again, Yoon set the briefcase on the table but didn't open it yet. Instead, he looked at Claire with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. You look like him, he said quietly. Your father, James. I've been going through old photographs, and the resemblance is striking. I wouldn't know. I don't remember him. I barely remember mine. Just fragments. The smell of his aftershave. The way he'd hum while he worked. The feel of his hand on my head when he said goodnight. Yoon's voice was thick with old grief. For 49 years, I've told myself those memories were enough. That not knowing the full truth was better than knowing it and living with the pain. And now I realize I was lying to myself. He opened the briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. After my father died, my mother received his personal effects. She put them in a box and stored them in the attic. She never looked at them again, and she discouraged me from looking either. She said it was too painful, that we needed to move forward, not backward. He spread the documents on the table. Photographs, letters, field notes. When my mother died 6 years ago, I inherited that box, but I still didn't open it. I told myself I was respecting her wishes. Really, I was afraid. Afraid of what I might find. Afraid of what might change. What changed your mind? You did. Yoon looked at her directly. I watched you on television, talking about how your father died trying to expose the truth. How you'd spent 3 months being hunted and threatened and intimidated, and you still wouldn't back down. And I realized I was a coward. I'd spent my whole life avoiding the truth while you'd risked everything to find it. He pushed a photograph across the table. It showed 4 men standing beside surveying equipment. Claire recognized 2 of them immediately, her father and Thomas Garrett. The third she assumed was Richard Yoon Sr. the fourth, was someone she didn't know. "Who's the 4th man?" she asked. "That's what I wanted to show you." Yoon pulled out another document, a letter, handwritten, dated August 1974. This was tucked inside my father's field journal. It's addressed to my mother, but he never sent it. I think he meant to give it to her when he got home from Washington. Claire read the letter. "Dear Grace, by the time you read this, I'll either be home safely or something will have gone terribly wrong. I'm writing this as insurance, because the 4 of us have stumbled onto something that powerful people want to keep hidden. We've found rare earth deposits under Hartwell Ridge that are worth more than we can calculate. Strategic minerals that could change the balance of power in the Cold War. But we've also found evidence that someone in the government already knows about them. Someone who's been working to keep them secret. There's a 5th member of our team. We thought he was just another geologist, hired by Elkridge like the rest of us. But Jim suspects he's something else. An observer. Maybe CIA. Maybe something worse. His name is Lawrence Pritchard. He's been asking questions that seem innocent on the surface, but are really probing what we know and who we've told. He's been making copies of our survey data. And yesterday, Jim caught him on the radio to someone using coded language. We're going to Washington in 3 days to testify. We're bringing all our evidence, including documentation of Pritchard's suspicious behavior. If we're right, if he's been planning to monitor us, then his employers already know we're planning to go public. That makes us dangerous. If something happens to me, Grace, I need you to know that I love you and Richard more than anything. But I also need you to know that we're doing the right thing. Some truths are too important to stay buried. All my love, Richard." Claire's hands were shaking when she finished reading. Lawrence Pritchard. That name is in the Elkridge documents. He's the one who ordered the survey team to suspend operations. I know. I've been reading everything I could find about the case. Yoon pulled out more documents. After I found this letter, I started digging. Lawrence Pritchard worked for Elkridge Mining for exactly 4 months, June through September 1974. Then he disappeared from public records for 3 years. When he resurfaced, he was working for the Department of Interior, the department that manages federal lands. Exactly. He rose through the ranks over the next 20 years. By 1995, he was Assistant Secretary for Land and Minerals Management, one of the most powerful positions in the department. Claire felt cold spreading through her chest. He wasn't just covering up a crime. He was part of it. I think he was the architect of it. Yoon pulled out a final document, a memo, stamped with government seals. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request 6 weeks ago, asking for any documents related to the Hartwell Ridge Wilderness designation. Most of it was redacted, but I got this one memo that slipped through. The memo was dated August 15th, 1974. It was addressed to the Secretary of the Interior from someone whose name was redacted, but the content was clear. The survey team has confirmed the presence of strategic minerals. However, the team leader, Hartwell, has expressed concerns about private extraction and is planning to recommend government seizure of the land through eminent domain. This approach is politically untenable and will trigger lawsuits that could tie up the resources for decades. Recommend alternative approach. Wilderness designation prevent any extraction while maintaining government option to reverse designation if strategic needs require it. Surveyor 5 reports team plans to testify before Congressional Committee. Recommend immediate action to prevent public disclosure. Authorization requested for containment protocols. Containment protocols, Claire whispered. They murdered our fathers and called it containment protocols. Yoon's jaw was tight. There's more. I traced Lawrence Pritchard's career after he left the Department of Interior. He retired in 2005 with full pension and honors, but he didn't stop working. He became a consultant. For who? For mining companies that wanted access to federal lands, including Black Peak Resources. Claire sat back, her mind reeling. He's been working both sides. First, he helped the government lock away the minerals. Then he's been helping Black Peak try to get access to them. And he's made millions doing it. I found financial records showing consulting fees of over $15 million paid to Pritchard from Black Peak over the past 18 years. Where is he now? That's the interesting part. Yoon's expression was grim. 3 days after your press conference, Lawrence Pritchard disappeared, left his home in Virginia, emptied his bank accounts, and vanished. FBI has a warrant for his arrest, but they can't find him. Claire thought about the men who'd hunted her through the forest, about the helicopter with no markings, about the threats and the bribes and the burned cabin. He's still connected to Black Peak, still helping them. I think so, which is why I wanted to meet with you in person. You lean forward. Patricia Carnes is building a case against Black Peak executives. But the real architect of the conspiracy is still out there. The man who ordered our fathers killed is still free. What do you want me to do? I want us to work together. Pool what we know. Find Pritchard before he disappears completely. Yoon's voice was steady, but Claire could hear the anger underneath. I've spent 49 years believing my father died in an accident. Now I know he was murdered on orders from a government official who's been profiting from that murder for decades. I want justice. Real justice. Not just some low-level executives taking the fall while the mastermind walks free. Claire thought about her father's field journal, about the careful notes he'd taken, documenting everything, about how he'd known something was wrong and had tried to do the right thing anyway. She thought about the past 3 months, about running and hiding and finally standing up, about transmitting documents from a fire tower while men with guns climbed the stairs. She thought it was over, thought she'd done her part. But Richard Yoon was right. The real villain was still out there, still free, still profiting from murder. I'm supposed to start ranger job in 2 weeks, Claire said slowly. I know. I'm not asking you to give that up. Just to help me find Pritchard first. Yoon pulled out a card. I'm a forensic pathologist. I work with law enforcement on cold cases. I have resources, contacts, investigative skills. What I don't have is your connection to this case. Your instincts. Your willingness to do whatever it takes. Claire took the card, studying it. Dr. Richard Yoon, Chief Medical Examiner, Kim County, Washington. What exactly are you proposing? Patricia Carnes has the corporate side of the investigation covered. But Pritchard is a different problem. He knows how law enforcement works. He's been evading them for weeks. We need to think like him. Figure out where he'd go. What he's planning. You think he's planning something? I think a man who spent 50 years protecting a secret doesn't just give up because he gets exposed. He either runs completely, disappears to a country with no extradition, or... Yoon paused. Or he tries to destroy the evidence that connects him to crime. The evidence is already public. The documents are in federal custody. The documents prove a conspiracy existed, but they don't directly prove Pritchard ordered the murders. That memo I showed you, the one asking for authorization for containment protocols, the name is redacted, without testimony from someone who was there, someone who can identify Pritchard as the author. It's circumstantial. Claire's stomach dropped. You think he's going after witnesses. I think he's going after anyone who can place him at the scene. Anyone who knew him during those 4 months in 1974. You pulled out a list. I've been tracking down people who worked for Elk Ridge Mining that summer. Most are dead. Natural causes, mostly. But there are 3 still alive. He showed her the names. Harold Brennan, surveyor, age 76, lives in Bozeman, Montana. Sarah Chun, administrative assistant, age 73, lives in Seattle. Washington Thomas Garrett Jr., son of deceased geologist, age 54, lives in Helena, Montana. Thomas Garrett Jr., Claire said, that's the 3rd geologist who died in the plane crash. He had a son, 6 years old at the time. Like us, he grew up without a father. Yoon's expression was tight. I contacted him 2 weeks ago, told him what we'd found. He wants to help. He remembers Pritchard coming to their house, offering his mother money to keep quiet about the crash. She refused, and a week later, she died. Car accident. Hit and run. Never solved. Claire felt rage building in her chest. How many people has he killed? I don't know, but I think he's not done. You can gather the documents back into his briefcase. These 3 witnesses are all that's left between Pritchard and complete deniability. If something happens to them, the case against him collapses. You need to tell the FBI. Get them protection. I did. Carnes has requested protective custody for all 3, but Brennan refuses. Says he's not afraid of anyone. Shun is considering it. And Garrett. Yoon's voice dropped. Garrett says he'd rather help us catch Pritchard than hide from him. Claire stood up, decision made. Where do we start? Yoon looked surprised. Just like that? You're in. My father died trying to expose Pritchard. Your father died. Thomas Garrett. Mary Carver's husband. How many others? Claire's voice was hard. I didn't survive 3 months of being hunted just to let the man who ordered it all walk free. If you've got a plan, I'm in. Yoon stood as well, extending his hand. Thank you. I know this is asking a lot. They shook hands, and Claire felt something shift. She wasn't alone anymore. Wasn't just a mountain recluse who'd stumbled onto a conspiracy. She was part of something larger. A coalition of children who'd grown up without fathers, all working to finally bring their killer to justice. What's the plan? She asked. We start with Harold Brennan in Bozeman. He worked closest with Pritchard during those 4 months. If anyone can help us track him, it's Brennan. Yoon checked his watch. I've got a rental car. We could drive there tonight, be there by morning. Claire thought about Jasper, still tied outside the diner. About the ranger job waiting in 2 weeks. About the quiet life she'd been planning. Then she thought about her father, 22 years old in those photographs, young and alive and trying to do the right thing. Let's go, she said, but I'm bringing my donkey. Yoon blinked. Your what? Long story. I'll tell you on the drive. Section 11, The Hunt. They reached Bozeman just after midnight. Claire had called ahead to Carnes, updating her on what Yoon had found. The prosecutor had been skeptical at first, warning them not to interfere with an active investigation. But when Claire mentioned Pritchard's potential threat to the remaining witnesses, Carnes had grudgingly agreed to coordinate. The FBI is stretched thin, Carnes had said. If you can help locate Pritchard, I won't complain. But don't do anything stupid. Don't confront him. Don't try to be heroes. Call me the second you have anything. Harold Brennan lived in a modest house on the east side of town, backing up to National Forest land. When Claire and Yoon arrived the next morning, they found him in his driveway, loading camping gear into an old pickup truck. He was a lean man, weathered by decades of outdoor work, with sharp blue eyes and hands that shook slightly with age. But his voice was strong when he greeted them. You must be the Hartwell girl and the Yoon boy. He looked them over. All grown up now, but I can see your father's in you. Richard had the same serious expression you're wearing, son. And James had that same stubborn set to his jaw. He nodded at Claire. Mr. Brennan, we need to talk about Lawrence Pritchard. Yoon said, I figured that's why you're here. Come on inside. Coffee's hot. Inside, the house was neat but sparse. The walls were covered with photographs of mountains and rivers, places Brennan had surveyed over 5 decades of work. He poured them coffee and sat down at a kitchen table scarred by years of use. I never forgot Larry Pritchard, Brennan said without preamble. Never trusted him either. Something off about the way he asked questions, like he was interrogating instead of collaborating. You knew he wasn't really a geologist? Claire asked. Suspected. Couldn't prove it. Brennan's jaw tightened. But I knew something was wrong when the plane went down. 3 men, all headed to testify, all dead in convenient mechanical failure? I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but that math doesn't add up. Did you ever confront Pritchard about it? Tried to. Went looking for him after the crash. But he'd already left Elkridge. Vanished like smoke. Brennan sipped his coffee. I kept tabs on him over the years, though. Saw him pop up in government positions. Watched him get rich consulting for mining companies. and I documented everything. He stood and walked to a closet, pulling out a cardboard box. Inside were files, photographs, and what looked like surveillance notes. "I'm 76 years old," Brennan said. "Spent 50 years waiting for someone to care about what happened in 1974. Now you're here, and the truth is finally coming out. Everything in this box is yours." Yoon started going through the files. Claire saw his expression change as he read. "You've been tracking Pritchard for 50 years?" Yoon asked, incredulous. "Hobby of mine. Retirement project." Brennan's smile was grim. "I worked as a surveyor for 40 years after Elkridge folded. Traveled all over the West. And funny thing, I kept running into Larry Pritchard. Different places, different times. Always working with mining companies trying to access protected lands." He pulled out a map marked with pins and dates. "Helena, Montana, 1982. Pritchard consulting for a company trying to mine near the Bob Marshall Wilderness. Project got shut down after environmental review. Idaho Springs, Colorado, 1991. Same thing. Moab, Utah, 2003. Jackson Hole, Wyoming, 2008. Every time, Pritchard was there, trying to find ways around federal protections." "Did you report this to anyone?" Claire asked. "Who would I report it to?" The man worked for the Department of Interior for 20 years. He had connections, power, resources. I was just an old surveyor with suspicions and circumstantial evidence. Brennan's expression darkened. "But I kept records, because I knew someday someone would care enough to look." Yoon pulled out a recent photograph. It showed Pritchard at what looked like a corporate event, shaking hands with men in expensive suits. The date stamp was 6 months ago. Where was this taken? Black Peak Resources' annual shareholder meeting in Denver. Brennan tapped the photo. Pritchard's been a regular attendee for years. Not just as a consultant. As a friend, he golfs with the CEO, attends board meetings as an advisor, and from what I can tell, he's been the mastermind behind their legal strategy to challenge wilderness designations. "So he's not just connected to Black Peak," Claire said slowly. "He's embedded with them. Has been for decades, and that makes him dangerous." Brennan looked at them both seriously. "You need to understand something. Larry Pritchard isn't some corrupt bureaucrat who took bribes and looked the other way. He's a true believer. He genuinely thinks the government shouldn't control mineral resources. That private enterprise should have access to everything. Your fathers died because they threatened his ideology, not just his paycheck." "That doesn't make it better," Yoon said. "No, it makes it worse. Because men who kill for money can be bought. Men who kill for beliefs can't be stopped except by force." Brennan pulled out a final document, a newspaper clipping from 3 weeks ago, circled in red. "This is why I'm leaving town. Why I'm heading into the backcountry for a while." The clipping was from a Bozeman newspaper, a small article about a house fire in a rural area outside town. "I don't understand," Claire said. "That house belonged to my neighbor, Frank Holloway. He's another old Elkridge surveyor, though he was junior staff back in 74. Didn't know much about the conspiracy." Brennan's voice was tight. "The fire was ruled accidental. Electrical malfunction. But Frank called me 2 days before he died. Said someone had been asking questions about the old mining surveys. Someone who described himself as a documentary filmmaker doing research on Elkridge. Pritchard," Yoon said. "That's my guess. He's tying up loose ends. Anyone who might remember him from 1974, anyone who could place him at the scene, is at risk." Brennan looked at them steadily. "Which is why I'm disappearing for a while, and why you two should be very, very careful." Claire exchanged glances with Yoon. "We need to warn the other witnesses. Sarah Chun and Thomas Garrett Jr. Already tried. Chun won't answer her phone, and Garrett..." Brennan shook his head. "Garrett is angry, wants to confront Pritchard. I warned him it was a bad idea, but he's not listening." "Where's Garrett now?" Yoon asked urgently. "Helena. Last I heard, he was trying to track down Pritchard through Black Peak contacts." Brennan stood. "You want my advice? Let the FBI handle this. Pritchard is a killer who's gotten away with it for 50 years. He's smart, connected, and desperate. You two are in over your heads. Maybe, Claire said, but our fathers didn't back down when they were in over their heads. Neither will we. Brennan studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. You're James Hartwell's daughter. All right. He had that same stubborn streak. He walked them to the door. There's one more thing. About a month ago, I received a package. No return address. Postmark from Virginia. Inside was a single page. A photocopy of that memo you probably found through FOIA. The one requesting containment protocols. Why would someone send you that? No idea. But there was a note attached. Handwritten. It said, they're planning to bury this again. Don't let them. Brennan pulled the note from his pocket and handed it to Yoon. I think someone inside the government is trying to help. Someone who knows what Pritchard did and wants him exposed. The handwriting was neat, almost elegant, official looking. Do you have any idea who sent it? Yoon asked. None. But whoever was knew my address and knew I'd care about that memo. Brennan opened the door, which means there are people in Washington who want the truth to come out, maybe even people in positions to help. After they left Brennan's house, Claire and Yoon sat in the rental car, going to the files he'd given them. This is incredible, Yoon said. 50 years of documentation, dates, locations, connections. Brennan built an entire case file. And Pritchard has no idea it exists, Claire said. He thinks the only evidence against him is that redacted memo. But this... She held up a photograph showing Pritchard shaking hands with an Elkridge executive in 1974. This puts him at the scene. Proves he wasn't just a geologist. We need to get this to Carnes immediately. Claire's phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but the area code was Montana. She answered. Ms. Hartwell. The voice was male, young, stressed. This is Tom Garrett. Richard Yoon gave me your number. I need help. I think I found Pritchard, but I'm not sure what to do. Claire put the phone on speaker. Where are you? Helena. There's an office building downtown that Black Peak uses for their Montana operations. I've been watching it for 2 days. And this morning I saw him, Lawrence Pritchard, walking in like he owned the place. You're sure it was him? Positive. I've been looking at old photographs for weeks. It's him, just older. Garrett's breathing was rapid. I called the FBI, but they said they need more than a visual sighting. They need proof he's actually there, not just someone who looks like him. Don't do anything, Yoon said urgently. Wait for us. We're in Bozeman. We could be there in 90 minutes. I can't wait that long. The FBI said if I could get a photograph, something that proves it's really him, they'd move in immediately. Garrett's voice was determined. I'm going inside. I'll pretend to be there for a business meeting. Get close enough for a clear photo. Tom, don't, Claire said. It's too dangerous. If he recognizes you, he won't. I was 6 years old when he knew my father. I look nothing like I did then. A pause. I'm doing this. For my dad. For my mom. For everyone he's killed. Tom. But the line was already dead. Claire looked at Yoon. We need to get to Helena. Now. Yoon was already starting the car. They drove fast, pushing the speed limit on Highway 90, covering the 90 miles of Helena in just over an hour. Claire tried calling Garrett back repeatedly, but he didn't answer. She called Carnes, updating her on the situation. The prosecutor was already coordinating with FBI in Helena, but it would take time to mobilize a team. Stall him if you can. Carnes said, don't let him confront Pritchard alone. They pulled up to the Black Peak office building at 11:47 a.m. It was a sleek glass structure in downtown Helena, corporate and anonymous. Claire scanned the street for Garrett's vehicle, found a sedan that matched the description Yoon had given her. He's already inside, Yoon said. They hurried to the building entrance. Claire had no plan, no idea what they'd do once inside. But every instinct screamed that Tom Garrett was in danger. The lobby was marble and chrome, staffed by a security guard at a desk. Claire walked up, trying to look confident. We're here to see Lawrence Pritchard, she said. The guard consulted his computer. I don't see anyone by that name with an appointment. He's a consultant. works with the executive team. Sorry, ma'am, without an appointment or an escort. I can't let you pass the lobby. Claire was about to argue when the elevator doors opened. A man walked out, talking urgently on a cell phone. It was Thomas Garrett Jr. His face was pale, eyes wide with fear. He saw Claire and Yoon and rushed over. We need to leave. Now. He's not alone up there. There are at least 3 other men and they're armed. Did you get the photo? Yoon asked. Yes, but... Garrett pulled out his phone, showing a blurry image of Lawrence Pritchard standing in an office with 2 other men. He saw me taking it. Recognized me. I barely got out. The elevator doors opened again, and this time 3 men in suits stepped out. They scanned the lobby, spotted Garrett, and started walking purposefully toward them. Time to go, Claire said. They moved quickly toward the exit, but the security guard stood up, blocking their path. Excuse me, you need to... Move, Claire said, her voice hard. Something in her expression made the guard step aside. They burst out of the building and ran for the rental car. Behind them, the 3 men were exiting, moving fast. Yoon started the engine, and they pulled out just as one of the men reached the sidewalk. Claire saw him raise something, a phone, taking pictures of their license plate. They're documenting us, Yoon said grimly. They know who we are now. Drive to the FBI office, Claire said. We need to get Garrett into protective custody, and we need to get them that photo. But as they drove, Claire's phone rang again. This time it was Carnes, and her voice was tense. Claire, we have a problem. Sarah Chun, the witness in Seattle, has gone missing. Her daughter reported her missing this morning. There are signs of a struggle at her apartment. Claire's blood ran cold. Pritchard got to her. We don't know that yet, but FBI is treating it as an abduction, which means you and Garrett need to be very careful. If Pritchard is eliminating witnesses, he is, and now he knows we're after him. Claire looked at the building receding behind them. He saw Garrett. He knows we're coordinating. He'll go to ground, or he'll come for us. Either way, we're running out of time. The FBI raid on Black Peak's Helena office happened at dawn, 3 days after Tom Garrett's close call. Claire watched from a safe distance as agents poured into the building, armed with warrants and backed by U.S. Marshals. Lawrence Pritchard was arrested trying to flee through a service exit. He was 76 years old, dignified even in handcuffs, his face showing no emotion as they led him to a waiting vehicle. Sarah Chun was found alive in a warehouse outside Spokane, held by 2 Black Peak contractors who cracked under FBI interrogation within hours. They confirmed Pritchard had ordered the abduction, had planned to make her disappear permanently once certain legal issues were resolved. The trial took 18 months. Claire testified for 3 days, walking the jury through everything she'd found. The metal box, her father's journals, the conspiracy that had spanned 5 decades. Richard Yoon Jr. testified about his father's letter. Tom Garrett about his mother's suspicious death. Harold Brennan about 50 years of documentation. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source, a former Department of Interior official who'd worked under Pritchard in the 1980s. She brought documents proving Pritchard had been systematically helping mining companies access protected lands in exchange for consulting fees. And she brought the original unredacted version of the 1974 memo requesting containment protocols. Pritchard's signature was at the bottom. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Lawrence Pritchard guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and 17 other charges. The judge sentenced him to life in federal prison without possibility of parole. He showed no remorse. Even at sentencing, he insisted he'd been protecting national security, that some secrets were worth killing to preserve. Claire didn't attend the sentencing. She'd said everything she needed to say during her testimony. Instead, she was in Glacier National Park, starting her first solo backcountry patrol of the season. It was late May, and the high country was just beginning to thaw. Snow still clung to the peaks. But down in the valleys, wildflowers were pushing through last year's dead grass. Bears were emerging from their dens, hungry and irritable. Hikers were testing the trails, eager for summer. Claire rode Jasper along a narrow path that wound through dense pine forest, then opened onto a high meadow. The donkey's ears swiveled constantly, alert to every sound, every scent. He'd save her life, once by refusing to walk a dangerous trail. She trusted his instincts now more than she trusted her own. Her radio crackled. "Ranger Hartwell, this is Base. Got a report of a lost hiker near Iceberg Lake. Can you respond?" Claire keyed the mic. "Copy that. En route. ETA 45 minutes. She urged Jasper into a faster pace, settling into the rhythm of the work. This was what she'd been looking for without knowing it, a way to be useful, to help people, to be part of something larger than her own grief. She'd spent 8 years hiding in the mountains, building walls between herself and the world. Then she'd spent 6 months tearing those walls down, fighting for truth and justice and her father's vindication. Now she was building something new. Not walls, but bridges. Between civilization and wilderness. Between people who needed help and someone capable of providing it. The lost hiker turned out to be a teenager from California, separated from his group, cold and scared, but uninjured. Claire gave him water and an energy bar, radioed his location to Base, and waited with him until the rescue team arrived. "Thank you," the kid said, tears of relief in his eyes. "I thought I was going to die out here." "The mountains aren't trying to kill you," Claire said gently. "They're just indifferent. You have to respect that indifference, but you don't have to fear it." After the rescue team left with the hiker, Claire made camp in a small clearing near Iceberg Lake. She built a fire, made coffee, and sat watching the sun set over the peaks. Her phone had no signal up here, which was fine. She'd check messages when she came back to the ranger station in 3 weeks. For now, she was alone with Jasper in the wilderness and the quiet satisfaction of work well done. She thought about her father sometimes, about James Hartwell, who died at 38 trying to expose a truth that had taken 50 years to fully come to light. She wished she'd known him, but she also felt like she knew him now, through his journals, his careful documentation, his refusal to look away from what was wrong. She'd inherited that from him, that stubbornness, that inability to let injustice stand unchallenged. But she'd also inherited something from Daniel, from 8 years of learning to be alone, without being lonely, from building a life with her own hands, from discovering that survival wasn't the same as living, but it was a necessary first step. Claire Hartwell was 43 years old. She'd lost a husband to cancer, and a father she'd never known to murder. She'd spent 8 years hiding from pain and 6 months fighting through it. She'd been hunted, threatened, and had watched her home burn to ash. But she was here. She was alive. She was doing work that mattered. And she was finally at peace. As darkness settled over the mountains and stars began to emerge in the clear Montana sky, Claire wrapped herself in her bedroll and closed her eyes. Jasper stood nearby, keeping watch, his ears swiveling toward sounds only he could hear. Tomorrow she'd continue her patrol. Check trails, maintain shelters, watch for signs of trouble. Next week, she'd rotate back to the ranger station for her time off. She'd call Richard Yoon, who'd become an unexpected friend. Maybe visit Mary Carver in Elk Bend. Check in with Patricia Carnes about ongoing investigations into Black Peak's corporate crimes. But tonight, she'd sleep under stars and country her father had once surveyed. On land he'd died trying to protect. In mountains that saved her life, and then demanded she save herself. And in the morning, she'd wake to Jasper's soft braying, to the smell of pine and wood smoke, to another day of being exactly where she belonged. The forest path that Jasper had refused to walk 5 months ago was overgrown now, reclaimed by the wilderness. Claire had gone back once, out of curiosity, and found that the beaver pond where she'd discovered the metal box had dried up. The box was gone, officially logged as evidence in federal custody. But the truth it had contained was permanent now, written into court records, preserved in testimony, impossible to bury again. Her father's name was cleared. The conspiracy was exposed. Justice, delayed by 50 years, had finally been served. And Claire Hartwell, daughter of a murdered geologist, widow of a man taken too soon, ranger in a high country, was free. Free from the past that had haunted her. Free from the isolation she'd chosen. Free to live whatever life she wanted to build next. She fell asleep listening to Jasper's breathing and the wind to the pines, at peace with mountains that had witnessed everything and judged nothing, that had held secrets for 50 years and finally let them go. In the end, the donkey had been right all along. There was danger on that path, but there was also truth, waiting to be found by someone brave enough to follow wherever it led. And Claire had followed it all the way home.